welcome to Why We Do What We Do, our Halloween edition. I am your terrified host, Abraham.
And I am your fearful host, Shane.
We are a psychology podcast. We talk about all of the things that humans do and animals do and monsters do. In the month of October, we celebrate the spookier things in psychology by talking about them. And there's a lot of human things that are spooky and scary that we can talk about.
Yeah, I think one of the things that humans are very afraid of is emotions.
They can be, for sure. And one of the emotions that they have is to be afraid of things. So here we are.
Yeah, look at that. Isn't that funny how that works? I think, didn't Watson say that like the three main human emotions were anger, fear, and joy or something like that?
It was something like that, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, not that we're taking advice from him, but you know.
No, and I think it was like the ones that are we're biologically prepared to experience, and then after that we like learn everything else was kind of his suggestion.
Yeah, as he was like banging pots and pans around a rabbit, you know?
I should have talked about that in this episode, but we did a full episode already on Watson's little Albert experiment. So
yeah, and on Watson himself.
Yes, yeah, that's right, we did. All right, so maybe we've already mentioned it. Maybe that's enough. Maybe we'll come back to it. I don't know. In the meantime, thank you for joining us, listeners. If you are here, this is your first time finding your way to our podcast, welcome. We are very happy to have you here.
Yes.
I'd like to wish you a happy Balloons Around the World Day on this October 2nd.
Yes, it is also Coffee with a Cop Day. However, everybody takes their coffee. That's your choice. That's all I'm saying.
Fair. Guardian Angels Day.
Yes, it's also International Day of Nonviolence. Love that.
Yes, love that so much. All about that. All right, National Custodial Workers Day.
Yep. National Fried Scallops Day, or Scallops, depending on where you're from.
Scallops. That's correct.
Scallops. Scallops is right. We know that.
For Shane, it is Audiophile Day. And for all of you, whoever, any one of our listeners, I don't know you could be an audiophile. This is just a day of recognition for those who really prefer that high fidelity sound in their life.
Yeah, or for those of you who really hate when one of us smacks our lips while we're talking. Like, that's,
yeah.
That you're like, oh no, or you're telling us to get a different mic. Anyway.
We did an episode on that too.
We did. We've covered a lot of stuff over the last 800 years. It's also National Produce Misting Day. Very specific.
I'm trying to imagine the conversation where someone was like, I strongly advocate that we apply to make it a holiday for misting produce. Like, when did that conversation happen? Who was involved? What were their arguments? I want to know.
Yeah, for sure. I want to know too.
If you, listener, were a part of that, please write in. It is National Kale Day. Speaking of misting.
Yeah, that's good. We can stop doing kale chips, though. We don't need kale chips anymore.
Oh, I like kale chips.
Okay, all right. You can have those. Only Abraham's allowed to have them. It is National Name Your Car Day, and in light of that, go listen to the song Maboo by Pup or Fox by Millencolin.
Oh, okay. Wow, you've got multiple car names songs like right on the top of the repertoire. That is impressive.
Yeah, or go read Christine by Stephen King.
Yeah, maybe a streetcar named Desire.
Or Herbie.
Yeah, there you go. Wow, I did not expect us to go down that rabbit hole. All right. It is National Pumpkin Seed Day.
Oh, love that. Such a good snack. It is National Research Maniacs Food Day.
All right, fair enough. It is Peanuts Day or Snoopy Day. It's
to celebrate Snoopy.
Okay, sweet. Yeah, so the comics. I mean, you can also celebrate peanuts. Those are great, but assuming you're not allergic to them, but Peanuts, the comics.
Peanuts. I like Peanuts. It's Random Acts of Poetry Day, which is kind of fun.
Yes. Or rap.
Yeah. Yeah, that works too. Yeah.
Walk to School Day. I mean, walking is good. Be safe.
Yeah, walking is good. Be safe. It's also World No Alcohol Day. Love that.
Yeah, done. Check. Mission accomplished.
Yep. Nailed it.
Active Aging Week. Well, that is my week every week.
Yep. I am actively aging all the time.
Yeah, I'm not being active, but I am aging.
By the nature of living, we are, right?
Yes.
It's also getting the world to beat a path to your door week. We have talked about this before. I feel like this is a week that's come up multiple times.
I feel, yeah, it has. Yeah, we've talked about that.
Deja
National
vu.
Chimney Safety Week. No more chimney sweeps.
Nope. It's National Drive Electric Week.
Well, that's fun.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how you're going to do that if you don't already have a mode of transportation that does that. But maybe you just.
I guess you could rent a car.
Oh, you could rent one. Yeah. Maybe you. Maybe you just bought an electric car. But congrats, I guess, if you did.
Yeah.
National Fall Foliage Week. This is a good week for that, and I do love me some fall foliage.
Yeah, we don't have that here in Florida. We don't have that.
That's true.
It's just
no.
It's always Shark Week though. It's also National Vegetarian Awareness Week. Love that.
Yeah. Trichotillomania, skin picking, and related BFRB Awareness Week.
I've worked with some folks that have trichotillomania, and it's a whole lot.
Same. Yeah.
It's National Chili Month. I love chili, so I'm excited about that.
Awesome. World Menopause Month. The whole world.
It's
happening.
It's National Sensory Processing Awareness Month as well.
It is Breast Cancer Awareness Month. Very important.
Very important. And it's also Vegetarian Month. Also very important.
Oh, man. We got through all those holidays. There was so many. That was a list.
It's the first of the month.
List. That's true. Yeah, everything does want to fall in the first of the month.
Yeah.
Anyway, as I mentioned, we're actually a psychology podcast, although we do enjoy reading the holidays to just celebrate the fact that our podcast publishes on a day. And that day is a day that somebody has chosen for something that is a cause important to them, such as misting vegetables in a grocery store.
Right.
But as I mentioned, we are in our spooky season, which means it is the season for fear, horror, terror, and fun.
Yes, we love it. So we today are going to talk about the concept and idea of fear itself. We have done a few of these series where we have talked about some different topics in our spooky seasons. We've unpacked some very specific topics, different diagnoses, different experiences, different circumstances and situations, but ultimately, it comes down to the idea that we are fearful creatures. And so fear is one of the most basic emotions and arguably one of the most powerful emotions that we have. And it will also underlie pretty much everything that we talk about for this Halloween-themed month of episodes. So everything that we're going to talk about is going to be related to fear in some way.
So we needed to understand it and have a good baseline amount of knowledge that we could then refer back to this discussion that we're having right now. So pay close attention because this will be your homework for the next 3 or 4 weeks.
Yep, absolutely. Get ready. Take notes.
Okay, which means that, of course, it is time for our textbook deconstruction of something that maybe is interesting or intriguing and distilling it down into something that is not. But I believe that we'll be able to, at the very least, provide a new framework for thinking about this emotion, fear, that at least might be thought-provoking. It might have you thinking about it in a little bit different of a way than maybe you have in the past.
Yeah, hopefully. So we are going to unpack the idea of fear. So we're going to ask the question of what is fear and why do we do it?
Yes. Shane, what are you afraid of?
Zombies.
What are you afraid of in your day-to-day?
Zombies. So, it's funny. I think about this a lot. I don't know that I have anything that I would consider or qualify as an explicit fear that's kind of out of the normal range. I feel like, I fear losing my kids and losing my family and stuff like that. I think those are fairly normal, fairly standard fare. I wouldn't call it a fear, but I have a healthy respect of nature. So sharks don't scare me per se, but I definitely try to avoid them. Yeah, that's fair. I go, I don't need to do this. I don't really know. I mean, I would imagine that certain circumstances would make me fearful, but I don't know that I have an outright standard fear. Xenomorphs, maybe that's the other one. Xenomorphs, the Aliens movie scared the hell out of me when I was a kid. So I think that's probably the other one.
Okay.
Not helpful. Sorry. Doesn't answer your question at all.
That's okay. I threw you on the spot. I didn't tell you I was going to ask, but I wanted to.
I had no idea.
Because I was sort of looking around to try and find what are the most common fears. There do not seem to be any empirically derived lists of the most common fears. I know I've talked about mine, which is a fear of water, and mostly the things that are in water that see me as a delicious snack for the day.
Well, I see you as a delicious snack, but I'm not in the water. So, I mean, maybe it must be water-based.
Yes, it's the water. Yes. That was really good. The creatures in the ocean, some of them are so large that like I feel like they would yawn and swallow me and wouldn't even notice.
Sure.
I am perfectly respectful of them having their space, and I will just stay out of their space. And that is that seems reasonable to me.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I found a lot of different lists with a lot of different suggestions about what the most common fears are, but they really encompass a sort of range of things that include real dangers, things where you are actually could be seriously injured or killed, which includes things like heights, certain animals, potentially small spaces, and then really intense emotions that are related to fear, such as disgust, embarrassment, and the unfamiliar or grotesque imagery. And so those are some of the common categories of things that people tend to be afraid of.
Yeah. So a few that you'll hear people talk about when they have like their common fears, things like public speaking, new foods, small spaces, blood. Blood's never really been a thing that's bothered me. I've been like, I don't know that I want to touch it, but it's one that doesn't like scare me, you know?
It didn't used to, and it now is starting to, and I don't love that for me.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah. There's also another fear that's really common is the fear of being alone. Heights, as I mentioned, so being in high places. A lot of the predatory animals, snakes are really common. Sharks are really common. Spiders are on there.
Alligators.
Alligators, yeah. And then clowns, and that's the grotesque imagery I was talking about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we are going to talk about that on a mini, so that's going to be fun.
Yeah, we haven't. I'm not. You know what? I'm not going to give away the sort of mini theme that we went with this year, and maybe for all future years. I don't know. We'll have to see. We'll unpack it when we get to our minis this for this Halloween season.
Yes, we will. So I think maybe before we get into definitions, we'll probably, I'm just going to drop it here. I think we maybe do a quick ad break because I think we're going to unpack a little bit. I know it's a little bit early in the ad break. I know maybe you fear ads, but I think at the end of the day, it might be good so that we can have like a continuous discussion about the definition of fear. So quick ad break. Sorry to scare you about this. Jump scare maybe even if you want to call it, but we'll be right back.
Let's try to define fear. We always need to start by unpacking our subject matter by having a agreed upon definition from which we can work, because it is important to know our terms, that we need to know what is and what is not the thing that we are talking about. And it is one of the pieces of a basic critical thinking exercise sometimes where you can already start to rule in how you can think about something more effectively by saying like, what should I be thinking about? What can I rule out right now as a waste of time? So let's talk about fear. And then one important thing to begin with is that pinning down a definition is kind of trickier than it sounds. And that's actually fairly common for things that feel intuitive to us, that feel like we don't even need to define it because we all know what it is. And hence the need for definition, that if we feel like we don't need to define it, then we definitely need to define it. And it can be trickier to do so. Of course, we can go the circular route with our definition by saying that fear is feeling afraid. All right.
And how do you know you're afraid? You feel it.
Yeah, exactly. And we must ask, what is feeling afraid? And then we get nowhere. So that is, feeling afraid is not a good definition of fear. It is logically useless.
Right. So we can similarly apply synonyms to fear, such as feeling horror, terror, disturbed, and scared. But again, we would have to define all of these. So we could make the case that fear is a sense of danger or threat. Now we need to unpack danger and threat. But this is a better definition because fear definitely is an emotional state, and applying the label of threatened is a workable enough start.
Yeah, exactly. Now, the one thing, though, that some people who I'm hoping are actually are sort of naysaying out there might be pointing out, but we can be afraid of things that are not necessarily dangers or threats, or even happening to us, in fact. For example, I can be afraid of missing a flight. I am not in that situation actually endangered. I'm not threatened, but I do feel a sensation that is similar to what I feel when there's a real threat. Like if I were in the ocean and I were to see a shark swimming near me. I mean, it's not the same exactly, but it is similar, right?
Right.
And further, I can be afraid for someone else. I can be afraid that someone I care about is going to lose their job if that was a thing that was going to happen. And this is not an immediate danger or threat, and it's not a thing that really impacts me at all, at least not directly, yet I can still feel that similar sensation of fear.
Right, absolutely. So people with anxiety sometimes fear being afraid, which feels wild, or they have a fear about a wide variety of things that could happen at any given moment, or even just a general sense of worry or fear. So as somebody who has anxiety, I definitely have a general sense of worry about everything. I wonder myself, because I know, because I think about this, like having anxiety is this kind of like this general feeling of something's going to go wrong. What if, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I don't have the fear part of it because I language around it. Like I try to language really specifically about the sensation I'm feeling. Like I feel nervous, I feel worried, I have those things, but I feel like fear is another level. And that's maybe where I struggle with defining it in my own life. And that's why I'm afraid of zombies and not like everyday things.
Fair enough.
That's just my own personal like experience around it or like processing around it. You know what I mean?
I always had a joke I enjoyed when I was teaching Psych 101. I used to say the quote, I want to say it was from JFK. I should have looked this up.
Yeah.
But it was the quote that's, the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. And when teaching this class, I'd say that sounds like generalized anxiety disorder.
It certainly does. That is exactly what it is.
Yeah. And I thought that was a pretty good joke.
Yeah, I do appreciate that joke. It was FDR that said that.
Oh, thank you. Okay, good. I could hear it in JFK's voice, and I was like, but I don't think it was JFK, but I just only hear it in his affect. Like,
yeah.
Anyway.
I do like the idea of your inner dialogue just being nothing but JFK going forward. That's a fun thought experiment. Like, what are we having for lunch here?
Indeed.
Yeah, should be good. So let's go with a dictionary definition. The dictionary definition of fear is a strong emotional state caused by the anticipation or awareness of danger. If it is caused by anticipation, what caused the anticipation? Therein lies the real cause of behavior, not another behavior, but the thing that preceded the anticipation. So we need to know a little bit about what triggered or evoked that feeling, right?
This is just one of the most basic exercises that I think is one of the easy things that I think I learned early on in my training in the field that a lot of people don't necessarily think about. They'll say, oh, fear is caused by anticipation. And they say, okay, that makes sense. Yeah, I anticipate this thing and therefore I am afraid. And I think, again, anticipation and like I think I could make the case that the anticipation is the fear, right? Like, how do we draw a boundary between one of those things where one is the cause and the other is the effect?
Right.
And instead, it makes the most sense to me to say, like, there's a jumble of emotional things that are going on in there, and that's great. But if we then go to what was the thing that evoked the anticipation, now we can speak to what is the circumstance that has produced this fear.
Sure.
And so rather than anticipation causing fear, it is the thing that caused the anticipation. Because again, I sort of think the anticipation is the fear.
Right.
Even if there were separate things that are in there, the fact is that, again, we can always point, like, that didn't come out of nowhere. It was evoked by some circumstance. And so we can point to that. And that now tells us a lot more about what's going on for that person and is a lot more informative, both diagnostically and for treatment. So that's why I like to make that definition. Anyway,
yeah,
we'll get more into that in a second. Fear is an emotion, which means that is a thing we do. And if it's a thing we do, that means it's behavior. And all behavior is influenced by our history of learning, our prevailing circumstances, the biological relevance to us, and our evolutionary history. Those are all of the factors that are always present in everything we always do ever.
Right. So behaviorally then, fear is behavior that is motivated by avoidance or escape from a situation or contextual features of a situation that have historically preceded aversives. So the idea is there's an aversive, and there are related events or related context or related stimuli to that aversive. And so we engage in some type of behavior to avoid that on some level, right? So like fear is almost like a behavior that is escape maintained.
Yeah. Or avoidance. And the other thing is, like, we do not have to be very well aware that that's like the sequence of things that are going on. We're not actively thinking through, that reminds me of this one thing that was a bad day I had once. It's as quick and as automatic as that thing that once had a historical pairing of a thing that was dangerous or threatening. Like, as soon as I see the thing that's related, that cue, then I'm immediately have that association with that previous experience. So I don't have to think about, like, what does that remind me of? Oh, a thing. Oh, I now feel fear. It's a totally unconscious automatic process that occurs just by a history of context around those things.
Right.
And we will speak to the fact that there are plenty of fears that we have that are about things that we'll never contact or experience.
Yep.
Or we will only once because it's the last thing we ever do.
Right, exactly.
I chose to use the term aversives here just to say something unpleasant, non-appetitive, if you will.
Sure.
Just because I feel like it doesn't have to be pain. Pain can be there, and pain, I think, is a very interesting discussion in its own right. But you also have, like, contrasting this with anger, annoyance, boredom. All of those are other emotions that are also motivated by terminating the situation, often aggressively, by changing the situation or producing more stimulating or entertaining circumstances, respectively, with respect to those emotions. But just trying to say, like, if we're going to use this definition of behavior that is motivated by escape or avoidance, there are a lot of emotions that we have that are motivated by escaping or avoiding, but are not necessarily related directly to pain, and are also not all fear.
Right.
But we're trying to unpack fear here, which, again, is the contextual features that have preceded those aversives in the past.
Right. So let's talk about what happens to our bodies, because I think that
we grow hair, get smelly.
It's gross. Ugh. It's like, I don't know. Bodies are so strange. It's so fun.
Stop using calories and they just turn into fat cells.
Yeah. Storage. Gross. I don't like it. So the physiology of fear, what is actually happening inside of our bodies when we start feeling fear or engaging in fear-related behavior? Well, when we feel fear, we experience some of those specific psychological or physiological responses. When we interpret something as dangerous, and there's a lot to unpack in what that means or how we interpret, but for now, it happens. So what happens next? So basically, some stimulus triggers a fear response. Let's unpack it that way. Our amygdala, a small almond-shaped brain structure believed to connect memory and emotion, is stimulated and activates the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus activates the endocrine system to release epinephrine and norepinephrine from our adrenal glands.
These chemicals have very specific effects that you'll recognize. Epinephrine cues a number of responses, such as increased breathing, so our lungs will expand and contract more to bring in more oxygen. Perspiration, dilated pupils will have a faster heart rate. Our muscles will tense up. Essentially, it's like prepare for battle. And further, other systems that our body that seem, I guess, unnecessary to a dangerous situation will sort of be put on pause. So our digestion will slow down considerably, and other related systems that are not necessarily important for survival in that moment.
Yeah, basically your body shuts down all the unnecessary systems and reallocates all of its energy and all of its resources to the systems that will keep you alive.
Yeah, it's a lot of get out of the situation type stuff, which could be fight or flight or freeze.
Yeah, sure. So if the sense of danger remains, the next step is that the pituitary gland releases chemicals that signal the adrenal glands to produce cortisol. This hormone affects how different organisms affect blood glucose levels, which in turn give your body an extra bump of energy and keeps you on high alert.
Yes, and then after that, of course, assuming that you have escaped or the situation has wound down, or eventually you just burned out, which can also happen too, your body will unwind from the sort of various activated systems. I did have a fun little thing when I was teaching Psych 101 to try and help streamline the fight or flight thing in the amygdala. It's the 4 F's: fight, flight, freeze, and making love.
That's my motto. That's what I live by, are the 4 F's.
Shane's next tattoo.
That's it. The 4 F's.
All right. So we have we have defined fear. We have talked through a very stimulating and interesting description of the biology of fear as it relates to the things that we'll actually feel, like what our body is doing physically, the real observable things. We only actually don't have a ton left, but we do need to talk about essentially the philosophy of how we interpret and understand fear from a psychological lens. And again, don't fear the commercials. Let's start to get into the philosophy of fear.
Yeah, I love Philosophy of Fear. It's my favorite book. So there are historical musings on fear that include a number of speculative hypotheses. And let's start with Freud. Freud called this realistic anxiety, moral anxiety, and neurotic anxiety because he liked things in threes, and these were varying levels of fear, right? So this was like, realistic anxiety was kind of like day-to-day stuff. Moral anxiety gets a little bit more nebulous, than neurotic anxiety is when you're about to explode, right?
Yeah, and I mean, I don't know if it was necessarily an intensity scale, but it was like different domains. Like the realistic anxiety is like real present danger, like there's a cocaine bear maybe nearby. The moral anxiety had more to do with like shame and guilt, and then the neurotic anxiety had to do with a loss of control, sort of emotional breakdown. Freud did use the German word for fear, but for some reason it got translated as anxiety in his writings. But that's more or less how he talked about it. So maybe he even called it realistic fear, moral fear, and neurotic fear.
Sure.
So anyway, it's kind of illuminating just to see that those are treated by some as being interchangeable ideas. And I do understand that more or less, but I think that's just unpacking, and that's how it was talked about.
Right. Okay. That makes more sense. I got you.
Okay. Another one who, a famous psychologist we have talked about on this show before, did a whole episode on him. In fact, his bio pod was William James. And William James had an interesting take on emotions that has not stood the test of time, I think. But he offered that fear was an emotion born from the behavior itself. And he gave what has now become, at least in reference to his work, a kind of classic example that when we see a bear charging at us, we run. But his argument here is that we feel fear because we do fear behavior, in this case, running.
Sure.
That is, we feel fear because we run. We run at first, then feel afraid second. Others argue instead that we run because we feel fear, but others have pointed out that we might not move at all and yet feel fear. So what the direction of the cause and effect relationship between the action and the emotion, they were trying to pin it down somewhere. And it's just, you can't do that explicitly because it shows up different ways for different people in different situations.
Right. That makes sense. So doing behaviors associated with fearful things certainly can influence the feelings that we have. These behaviors can even amplify those feelings. For example, if, let's say I'm nervous about missing my flight, right? So we kind of talked about it earlier. I'm nervous about missing my flight. I'm anxious about that. And then I start kind of moving faster or walking faster or running through the airport. Like I could like just the physiology of your heart rate increasing and trying to get somewhere on time, the languaging of I have to move faster or I will not get to the place on time. Like the combination of those things can elevate levels of fear. And also as a result, your heart rate will increase, your stress will increase, your cortisol levels, all the stuff that is related to all the physiology stuff starts to increase by the nature of I'm doing the physical activity with the languaging of the context.
Right. Yeah, I think if you've ever had the experience of being really angry and then decided to punch a punching bag or punch a pillow, oftentimes that can actually make the anger feel more intense, at least briefly.
Right.
Like once you start getting into the like physicality of anger, which can look like aggression, then that can actually amplify the then feelings of anger. So there is like a feedback mechanism in there. And you can do the reverse too. Like if you're feeling particularly stressed out, you can behave in a very stressed out way and amplify that feeling of stress.
Right.
You can also do the opposite, which is, get in like a Zen Buddhist sort of position and take some deep breaths. And even though that may not completely get rid of that feeling of anxiousness, whatever it is, it can turn the temperature down. It can just bring it to a sort of less intense level by doing behaviors that are the opposite of the emotion that you're feeling.
Right.
Again, you kind of get some with the other, but it's not going to be like, just because I smile doesn't mean I'm going to go from sad to feeling happy.
Right.
But it can help a little. Just because I frown doesn't mean I'll go from happy to feeling sad, but it can affect it a little. But it's just doing all those things. Like everything sort of moves together in those directions because our physiological muscle movements that we do are part of our body, just the way that our emotions and our neurology is part of our body. So we don't get to do one without the other.
Right. Absolutely.
Okay. So yeah, fear is a complex tapestry of experiences that goes beyond simple fearful stimulus, etc. It is influenced by a range of factors, and experiences with those different things can titrate that fear response up or down. So one might be afraid of heights until they spend a lot of time in high places, and eventually that fear starts to fade away over time. I was terribly afraid of going out in the water. And I did work through some psychological exercises meant to help with that kind of thing. But it also was going out in the water and actually just experiencing it and like being comfortable, or at least finding a way to sit comfortably in the ocean, looking at the thousands of fish that are all eager to destroy me, and they're not destroying me, and I'm okay.
Sure. Yeah. So another side of this too, though, is that you might not have a fear of dogs until you're attacked by a dog. And then as a result of that experience, you might develop a very particular fear about being bitten or attacked by a dog because of that really aversive experience, right? Like, so like, it's not just that you are afraid of things when you're born. Like there are some things that we might be nervous about or might make us nervous, but our experiences really shape up a lot of very specific things.
Yeah. And then things that like no one tells us that we're afraid of or that we should be afraid of, but then we experience them and we start to develop a fear of those things.
Right.
Now, of course, relatedly, our fears can also be affected by and titrated by our language, meaning that we might experience fear of going to a dentist after hearing horror stories about pain and suffering that someone else experienced at a dentist, even though we never had those experiences ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And we might not experience fear during a scary movie if someone has already given away the ending before we have seen it.
Right.
And so there are aspects of, again, our language can really dial up the intensity or dial down the intensity of our emotional states, and fear is definitely one of those.
Right. And fear is also influenced by our physiological states. So if we're highly aroused or in a state of deprivation, such as hunger, thirst, if we're hungry, thirsty, or tired, we might be more fearful than if we are relaxed, calm, and satiated. Or we might be more or less afraid if we are severely intoxicated by some substance, or depending on the substance too, and other factors that we had mentioned, there's a lot of different things that can happen that can kind of elevate, alter, change, shift our states and kind of amplify those emotions in different ways.
Yeah, someone who has taken a handful of Xanax, probably very little reaction to what would otherwise be fearful stimuli.
Right.
Someone who is drunk, I don't know. Just depends on them. They might be more afraid of something that they wouldn't otherwise be afraid of or wouldn't be as afraid of. They might be less afraid of things they'd normally be afraid of. I think it just depends on the person and the thing they're reacting to.
Right.
And then, of course, the context of that situation or circumstance. It can also really influence how fearfully we react to something. A cat jumping down from a shelf is not scary if we like see it coming. But it might be scary if it just happens out of nowhere and all of a sudden just lands right next to us. We were like, had no anticipation of that event. And all of a sudden there's like a thud and like something even touches us.
Yeah.
And that can be a little scary.
Especially if you don't have a cat.
that can be really scary. But that context, the situation is really important in affecting how something shows up for us as being scary or not.
Right. Or something like a knock on the door in the middle of the day. That might not be so frightening, but I mean, depending, right? Like nobody's like just showing up at people's houses anymore, really.
Yeah, just in general.
Just in general.
Yeah.
But at night, in the middle of the night, if we aren't expecting it, that can be a little bit dicey, right? That can be a little bit dodgy, and that can probably elevate us a little bit. It puts us on guard at the very least.
Yeah, a knock at the door at 2 a.m., a worrying event. A knock at the door at 2 p.m., you're like, yeah, who's there?
Yeah, there's my water deliveries here.
Yeah, sure. Context.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So as I said, this is a rich tapestry, a variety of circumstances that will affect our experience of fear. An animal that we have a history of fear with jumping out at us unexpectedly in the dark when we're in a state of desperation is a recipe for like maximum fear. Just as an example, there are lots of ways you could arrange that.
Yeah. Lots and lots of scariness. So, of course, the buildup of tension that gradually introduces increasingly relevant horror context can make the final payoff much scarier than if the big reveal happened without any suspense. So, like when you talk about movies and you talk about horror movies and how people get scared, there's a lot of build up to the monster or to the final conflict or whatever it is, and it kind of gets scarier as it goes. Like, and they do this through visuals, they do this through sound design, they do this through all different kinds of things. But that buildup does lead to a larger payoff when there are bigger, scarier jump scares and whatnot in movies.
Yeah, exactly. And some movie directors and writers will try this approach when they just sort of throw everything at you all at once without building any suspense. It's just like, wow, look at all this stuff.
It's so scary.
And some also think that like confusing, bizarre imagery is the best recipe for creating a fear response in the audience. Like,
I'm just the Ring was pretty effective. I'm just saying the Ring was that freaked me out for a little bit. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, it less on the bizarre end of things. That was sort of more the grotesque imagery, I guess. But like,
sure,
I've seen some movies where like it seems like how they were trying to generate fear in the audience was by confusing you greatly.
Sure,
you're like, I have no idea what's going on.
Well, what's the scariest movie scene for you then? Like, if you think about a movie scene, and because we know you like movies, what's the scariest movie scene that you can think of?
You know, Poltergeist was my go-to movie for a long time as like one of the scariest movies.
It's a good one.
And the scenes, I mean, there were a lot of scenes in there, but like some of the scariest scenes were like the build up to things that were like about to happen.
Yeah.
I'm trying to remember others though, because like I feel like I've seen some. The most recent, the first one that came out in like 2017. That one had some like legitimately like really scary things, scenes in it. And so I think there's somewhere like oftentimes a really slow buildup where it's like it's really clear that's where it's going. Those are some of the scariest. So like for me, the unknown is less scarier than the known scary thing that like is building suspense.
Sure.
When it just jumps out of nowhere and it's just like all of a sudden there's a giant toothy clown creature and I had no buildup whatsoever, like assuming something like that happened.
Yeah.
It's not really that scary. It's just sort of like a surprise.
Yeah.
Versus like when he crawls out of the fridge and like slowly unwinds himself. Like,
yeah, that's pretty good.
That was a really creepy scene because it's like it's disturbing, it's grotesque, it's also like slow and building, but the threat is like very, very present. So that for me at least, that's the stuff that works really, really well.
Yeah.
But so like just confusion for me has been like I'm not really afraid of being confused.
Sure.
So like things that are nonsensical, I'm mostly just like, oh, what am I supposed to be getting from this?
Yeah, I hear you. So the two scenes that I thought of immediately were in Aliens when the soldier aliens start like crawling down off the walls, like, and you realize there's a bunch of them and they're surrounded. That's a pretty gnarly scene. You're like, oh no, because you already know they're scary from the first movie. So you have that context. And then the second scene I could think of that was really scary to me is the boat ride in Willy Wonka. Horrifying.
That one does have a lot of confusion going on, but also a lot of disturbing imagery thrown into the confusion.
Yeah. Yep. It works. It's effective.
Well, we started talking about movies, which means that we are off track, which means that we should probably take an ad break and reset. All right, we're going to wrap up our discussion on fear by talking about the problems with fear. But first, we need to talk about why it's not a problem, because being afraid is a 100% human, normal reaction to perceived threats in one's environment. I mean, fear is very biologically useful for survival, because when we escape or avoid things that are dangerous, then we're more likely to survive. Very straightforward.
Right.
That is true within the lifetime of an organism and across generations of that organism's species. However, fear is not necessarily evoked by immediately present visible threats. Often, for humans, it is psychological, which, very colloquially speaking, we generally assume that term when people say it's like psychological. I think I generally assume what they mean is that it is a language-driven event or experience.
Right. And so, as we mentioned, we can be afraid of things to a greater degree than what is warranted by the nature of the threat or by the probability of that threat. And these are phobias. When fear exceeds normal responses or normal response levels and creates severe avoidance to even associations with the threat, then we're looking at something that is a little bit more concerning, especially if it starts to impact somebody's quality of life. So, for instance, someone who has an actual phobia of spiders is often afraid of even the idea that there could be a spider nearby, even if there is no indication that this is actually the case. And so sometimes people have really intense phobias that do impact their life on these really intense levels.
Yeah. And obviously, seeing a spider would be a very fear-inducing experience for them, but the anticipation of spiders is basically as severe as seeing one. And that's where it starts to become problematic, because you can imagine threats everywhere.
Sure.
That aren't necessarily there. And some fears and phobias are exacerbated by or are characteristic of other mental health issues. So people with severe anxiety, schizophrenia, panic disorders, mood disorders, PTSD, and others, sometimes they're going to experience more often and other types of fear and sort of phobia related behaviors and patterns because it is a part of or is sort of a bonus, if you will, to the like other mental health issues they might be suffering.
Right. So, of course, fear can be both useful and destructive, but when fear begins to extend well beyond the reasonable and probable reality of a threat, then it can really start to impede that quality of life piece that I was talking about. And so for folks that have that experience where their quality of life starts to get impacted or they start to kind of lose the joy and richness of life, they might seek therapy or they might seek treatment for this.
Yes, exactly. So the most common treatment for phobias specifically is exposure therapy.
And to be clear, not like Maury Povich exposure therapy, where he like makes people who are afraid of pickles look at a giant jar of pickles.
That actually is a version of it we'll talk about.
Yeah.
And also not exposure as in to get naked, although that is a fear for some people too.
Yes, it is.
But exposure and response prevention is a brilliant repackaging of previously existing behavioral techniques and literature that uses gradual exposure to help people overcome anxieties and compulsive disorders. And essentially, this just involves slowly increasing someone's contact with the feared context or object. So if you have a fear of snakes, let's just start with a fear of snakes, and we'll walk through the steps that it would be common in something like this. I'm not saying these are the exact steps. They might be for somebody, but it'd be something kind of like this order. It might be starting with just imagining a snake. Close your eyes, pretend, like think about a snake. Then once they can do that without feeling distressed, then you might get used to looking at a picture of a snake. And when they can do that, then maybe you'll advance to having like a fake snake, a pretend snake that's nearby. Maybe they are even touching the fake snake. Then maybe you have like a real snake that's kind of nearby but is in a cage, so it can't get out. And again, once they're experiencing that with low levels of distress, then maybe you go as far as to allowing them to hold the snake.
Right.
You have it go in their hands, on their lap. And so it's just gradually increasing the exposure to the thing. And once the distress levels come down at that level of exposure, you just increase it a little more. There's one little caveat, which is that sometimes our imaginations are so good that it can be hard to get past that step. You might have to start with a picture of a snake,
right?
Because those really can't do anything.
Right.
But imagining a snake could be worse for someone than seeing an actual snake.
Yeah. Another thing to consider too inside of that is that those levels, like whenever somebody has like an identified level of exposure, you might not just be doing the exposure part, you might also be increasing how long they're exposed to it.
Oh,
so
yes.
like part
Good
of your
point.
goals might actually break down to go, okay, so now you've seen a picture of a snake for 1 second,
Yep.
and then you avoided it. And then maybe you do, like when you see the snake in the cage, like it might even be approaches, like you get a little bit closer and a little bit closer for a little bit longer. Like you can really break
Right.
this down into really small components.
Exactly.
So immersion therapy is similar, but can start by putting somebody into the full final stage of exposure. You jump straight to covered in snakes like Indiana Jones, right?
Yep.
Although some immersions still do this slowly, they just flood your environment with a lot of the fearful cues. Maybe not like the snake pit per se. I don't know many therapists who have like access to a full-on snake pit, but what they might do is like, they might walk in and they might already have pictures or images or posters or things like that of snakes, like almost right away for the person to be exposed to it immediately.
Yeah. So like if you had claustrophobia, for example, you're afraid of small spaces, they might even say like, I'm going to put you in this closet right now. The door's unlocked. I'm going to even leave it cracked a little bit, but we're just going right in there. Like basically it's just fully immersion in whatever that scenario is. If you're afraid of public speaking, they might have you go on to a stage and maybe even have people there. Anyway, so the immersion therapy can look a lot like just throwing you in the deep end of the fearful situation,
right?
To an extent,
right?
Depending on what they're trying to do with it and what makes sense for you,
right? And now, for some folks, anti-anxiety medications can help. They can be useful. They can work, but doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be effective for every single person. And dosage might not be right for certain people. So it does take a professional to work with you on that to figure out what works, what doesn't work, what's effective, what's not, and what's going to benefit you.
Yeah, you want to be careful with how you take prescribed substances of that nature, because again, if a thought is enough to set you off, then like you probably want to not just spend your whole life on anti-anxiety medication, just popping one every few minutes.
Right.
I don't know, maybe you do. Some therapists might disagree with me on that, but generally speaking, if you can have it for the situations where it's the most intense and you're going to essentially be useless if you cannot get through that moment effectively, that might be the strategy. And then otherwise you work on ways to deal with it without necessarily depending on medication. But don't listen to me. Go talk to your doctor.
Yes.
They will help you make those decisions.
Yes.
All right. I think we did it. I think we talked about fear.
Yeah, I think we unpacked it. I mean, I don't know that there's much more to say. It's a thing that we do. It's a thing that we experience. It's very experience and physiologically and language driven. So the three of those things together do create kind of this wonderful cocktail of avoidance and escape behavior. So I think we did a good job. I think that's a good place to be for this one.
Awesome. My fear about getting through this episode is now a moot point.
Yay! I love that.
Just kidding. I hope that you all enjoyed what you heard here today. If you would like to support us, you can head over to Patreon. You can pick up some merch at a store, or leave us a rating and review, subscribe, and of course, go share us with a friend. If you do join us on Patreon, huge shout out and thank you to you for that generous gesture. It really means a lot to us. And there have been a group of people who have been sticking with us, be in their generous selves, supporting us with the mission of this podcast. And so they get a special shout out, and you can too if you join this list. And that is Mike M, Megan, Mike T, Justin, Kim, Joshua, Brad, Stephanie, Olivia, Brian, Ashley, Kiara, and Michelle. Thank you all so much. I really appreciate you.
Yes, thank you. We adore you on so many levels.
Of course, I could not do this without my team of people writing and fact-checking. From Shane and myself, our social media coordinator is Emma Wilson, and the guy who does the audio stuff that makes us sound like a podcast is Justin, who we just immensely appreciate.
Yes, even though we make his life harder.
We do make his life harder, Justin. We really appreciate you.
We're really so sorry.
We really appreciate you.
We're really so sorry.
huge shout out and thank you to you.
Yes, thank you. We adore you on so many levels.
We really appreciate you. We are. Anyway, we always actually wrap up these discussions by recommending some things. Is there anything that you would like to add or that I forgot before we get to our recommendations?
Nope, not today.
All right, let's do it.
Let's do it. Recommendations. I got to see a band last night, and I've always really liked this band, and I'm so excited that I finally got to see them because they are on that level of extreme music that just sounds absurd. Like if you told somebody who didn't listen to this type of music, they'd be like, "Are you okay?" And that band is a band called Pig Destroyer. They sound exactly like their band name sounds. It sounds like just irresponsible violence put to audio form.
Wow.
They have put out a bunch of records, but I want to, and I've recommended them on here before for sure.
See, I do remember this.
Yeah, I think I recommended Head Cage, which was their newer record, but I'm going to recommend an older record. And it's really the record that solidified how much I liked this band when I was growing up. And that is a record called Terrifier. And just to go along with the theme, the spooky theme of Halloween and all the scariness and all that, Terrifier is 21 songs, 32 minutes.
Whoa.
Uh-huh.
These are short songs.
Short, fast.
Or one very long song and then very, very short songs.
It's quite a bit. So fair warning, content warning, it is violent, it is scary. The cover album is a little bit, very bit not safe for work. So just don't look it up at work. I think it's a great listen if you like extreme kind of like grind metal with a little bit of like storytelling in it.
Wow.
Uh-huh.
Okay. Pig Destroyer.
Terrifier. It sounds, that's what the whole record sounds like. If you want to be scared, it's a good listen.
That is on brand for this for this discussion today, for this episode.
Yeah.
I'm recommending a TV show. This is the last season that they're going to come out with. I don't know. I mean, it's possible they'll try more, but I don't know how they're going to come back from their ending if they do. I'm pretty sure this was meant to be the series finale. This is The Umbrella Academy, season 4.
Ooh.
This is on Netflix. It was kind of cathartic in a way. I actually liked the way that they wrapped it all up. I just love this show a lot. I think the writing on it is fantastic. I really enjoy the characters and the dynamics and everything. And I just think it's a really fun show.
Sure.
For those of you who have never heard of it at all, it's sort of loosely, if you will, about a school of adopted children who have superpowers, which sounds a lot like X-Men. And in a way it is.
Sure.
There's a lot of crime fighting involved. But of course, this is actually once they have grown into adults and they have sort of gone their own separate ways and how they sort of are dealing with life. And then they're sort of forced back together. And anyway, so the last season 4 is out. I really enjoyed it. I think it's a really great show. So strong recommend for The Umbrella Academy. I believe this is considered a Netflix original, so all of it should be streaming there. If you have Netflix, I recommend checking it out.
And for folks that don't know, Umbrella Academy was originally written by Gerard Way, the singer of My Chemical Romance. And it is a comic book.
Yes, that is a fact. Yeah, I believe published by Dark Horse Comics. And I believe that he was directly involved with the production of the show. So I think that he saw and helped facilitate the creation of the show from start to end. So I think his vision was, they were able to remain fairly true to his vision, or, you know, at least a decent way throughout, which is cool.
Yeah, they did a good job with it.
Yeah. So, okay, great. Well, that's what we have to say about Pig Destroyer and the Umbrella Academy and Fear.
Sure.
If you would like to tell us your thoughts on Fear, what we got wrong, what we got right, we like to send heaping praise our way, you can do that thing. You can email us directly. We would love to hear from you. You can email us at info@wwd.wwdpodcast.com. Again, that is info@wwdpodcast.com. You can also reach us on the social media platforms. We really like hearing from people. But I think that is all that I have to say. Anything you'd like to add, Shane?
No, I think that's it.
All right. Well, just getting started in October. Happy Halloween, everyone. This is Abraham.
Happy Halloween. And this is Shane.
We're out.
Bye.
You've been listening to Why We Do What We Do. You can learn more about this and other episodes by going to www.wwdpodcast.com. Thanks for listening, and we hope you have an awesome day.